Obviously, the days can get a little bit shorter for all of us in this times of the year. But one of the things that really stands out to me about this moment in reflection is when I used to live in Minnesota. As you've heard me talk about in the past, Minnesota, as far as I'm concerned, is the coldest state or land in the world. And it's an interesting place to live this time of year, living in those northern states. I lived in Michigan for a while. Years ago, I played baseball in Montana. And when I was in Montana, there was a day, I can't remember what it was in the summer. I can't remember exactly what time of year it was. It had to have been late June. I don't think it was in July, but I remember we played 3 games without lights. We played night games in Montana, and we didn't have lights for the games. And I remember that we used to, in professional baseball, in low levels of professional baseball, you live with what's called the host family. And so a host family is exactly how it sounds. They host you. And a lot of times it was to combat the rent, and you didn't get, I know it's changed recently with minor league baseball, but we were making $500-$600 every 2 weeks of a paycheck. And I think it might even been lower in the lowest levels in the rookie ball and short season. I think that $600 mark was when I was in full season. But needless to say, obviously you weren't really generating that much money. And so you needed a host family largely to supply a place without having to spend for rent. A lot of the host families would grocery shop for you, and they would provide food, and the teams and the organizations provided food as well. So you would have, you'd usually have your meals taken care of, and you would have your rent taken care of. And that was super needed, right? Because you would need to try to pocket as much of that cash as possible. And that's why a lot of professional minor league athletes work in the off seasons, because you need a job to substitute for the money that you make in season. It's a hard life, obviously. But in host families, aren't just in professional baseball. I had host families in college when I played college summer ball. I had host families when I played in Wisconsin a few years, and I had a host family there. And I know I've worked with a lot of hockey guys, and I know a lot of hockey players. I think they call their host families billet families. And billet families are similar to the same thing, and they have those families support them and help them as they go up through the ranks of juniors hockey and try to make their way into professional hockey. So when I was in Helena, I was living in an attic with the family. I can't remember their name, which bums me out. They were really kind people. I was just in and out of playing there, but they were really kind people. And I was in the attic of the house. We had maybe 4 or 5 guys in the minor leagues on that team that were in that house. And we didn't see much of them, but I do remember specifically, we played these 3 games when I was in Montana, and the sun was out till like 11 p.m. And we didn't need lights. Game was probably 5:30, 5:45 start time, maybe 6. I can't recall exactly. And we played a full game with no lights on. They might have turned them on at the end, but I remember going home and it was still light out, and that was so cool to me. But one of the nights I came home, and my host dad was sitting on a lawn chair drinking a beer, and he had asked me if I wanted to have a beer with him if I'd ever seen a sunset around 11 p.m. And I had not at that time in my life. So I sat with him on a lawn chair next to him, and we just drank a beer as we watched the sunset after playing a ball game. I thought that was so cool. And I don't remember how the days went after that. I've never been to Alaska, but I've heard many stories about Alaska. And I know a lot of guys who played collegiate summer ball in Alaska who have told me similar stories as well. And for me, I'd moved on from that team. Maybe a few days later after that, I got called up and I was sent over to Wisconsin. So I don't remember exactly what the skylight was like or what the sun rising and when it was setting in that summer of Montana. But I do know in Minnesota, this time of year, it gets dark. And when it gets dark and it's cold, that makes for a harsh experience, harsh winters. And a lot of that is actually what curated a lot of my work over the years, because I struggled so much with seasonal depressions and being able to handle not much sunlight and such cold weather. I just never dealt well with that. And I lived in the North my whole life, and growing up and a lot into all through my 20s, I spent all these winters in those states. So I got used to it, and I learned a lot of things like cold exposure, the importance of getting up in the morning and setting your circadian rhythm and getting in alignment with the sun. Even when it was cold, you got to get out there and do it, right? And I know it's a lot easier now for me to say that living in Arizona. It's a lot easier for me to get up in the morning and go for a walk. In fact, it's one of my favorite things to do is to get up in the morning, walk, see the mountains, see the sun rising, and just sort of connect with the sun for the day. And one of the things that's really fascinating about our circadian rhythm is when we get up in the morning and we view sunrises, when we view sunlight to start our day, it's sort of like a battery charger. You really want to think of like photosynthesis, of how a sun charges a plant. You want to think the same thing about your biology. You're this chargeable system, and you need to get charged up by nature and the sun to start your day. And it's not that we deplete resources when we sleep. We recover and we hardwire everything in our sleep, and that's our biggest recovery tool is sleep. But when we're trying to turn on, we're trying to be able to activate ourselves to work and think appropriately and be responsive throughout the course of the day, we really do need that sun to attach with our circadian rhythm when we first wake up in the morning. And so it's super crucial to get out there and view sunlight when you first wake up, even if you live in those cold states. And I know a lot of my time here, sometimes I'll spend an hour and a half out there in the mornings in Arizona, typically as like a hard routine or structure. I try to make sure I'm at least 30 minutes in the morning of viewing sunlight. And I try to do that with water, post walk, or include that with my walk. And I try to do all that before I have any coffee. I meditate. I do a lot of that stuff, but the majority of the focus in the morning is to get outside and view the sunlight. And why that happens is that our eyes are a part of our brain. It's the only part of the brain outside of the skull. And so our eyes are such huge key receptors to what nature and sensory stimulation around us is doing to us. And I really think that is one of the key reasons why we understand body language so well innately, and how we trust people innately, or we feel something's off with people. I think it's the use of our vision and how directly that impacts into our brain and sends signals into how we analyze the things in front of us. Right. And I think that has a lot to do with why body language is such a formidable force in terms of communication and how we do those things. And so I know that the winter days are getting cold. They're not only cold, they're getting shorter, and we're in that short period right now specifically. And so even when you're up north right now, it's important to get outside. Might not be 30 minutes when it's 5 degrees and sometimes it's below. But I think you find little advantages when you live in cold climates, right? I mean, I used to spend I used to go outside 5 minutes with my shirt off and in boxers or shorts. I would protect my feet as best as I could, but I would also try to have my feet exposed. And I would consider that a lot of my cold exposure. I'd pair that with a cold shower later those mornings, but I would get outside and let the cold air just hit me for about 5 minutes while I just viewed off into the sun. And I used that, and then I could bundle up. I would take the trash out. I would maybe still go for a short walk to a coffee shop nearby. And I still found time to get outside, because it's still crucial to get outside. And even if you bundle up, you don't have to do the clothes off as I'm talking about. It's important. It's just important that those eyeballs get in alignment with the sun and the rhythm of the sun. And keep that in mind, what I'm talking about, of those eyes being a piece of the brain. That brain wants to get the receptors and understand where nature's at so it can align our entire nervous system with what we need to do to be functionable and functioning at a high level. And the irony of that is not only can we get some testosterone and kind of turn on our cortisol in a healthy way and drive ourselves to dopamine and all these things that help us work throughout the day, we actually start to produce the melatonin aspect that helps us sleep later that night. So it's a weird thing how it sets this internal clock when we first wake up and we view the sun. we view the sun, and it turns on our clock that actually tells us when to go to sleep. And so as the sun changes throughout the course of the year, it's crucial that we're constantly studying it, we're aware of it, and we're in alignment with it, because our sleep patterns are going to change throughout the course of the year. I know when I first came in tune with this, I was working a job years ago, and the job hours in Minnesota specifically started at 3 p.m. and they ended at 10 p.m. And I noticed my mood change and my emotions change drastically as the course of the winter went on with that job. And I really struggled mentally working that job. And I couldn't understand why, because it was a teaching, coaching job. And I liked teaching, I liked coaching, I liked working with kids. So I knew that I liked the field that I was in, but I couldn't understand why I didn't want to be at work, and why it was so hard to go to sleep afterwards, and why my body felt so sluggish, until I started to come into understanding about how crucial the sun was, right? And so if you hear those hours I just mentioned, 3 to 10, well, at 4:30, I want to say, even around 4, even before 4:30, the sun, I believe, I'm not there right now, but I think the sun starts going down in those northern states this time of the year right after 4. So, I mean, I was starting work as the sun was going down. And as the sun was going down and I have to be turned on, obviously that led into me needing to use some sort of artificial upper, whether that was a late night coffee. Back then I drank pre-workouts and energy drinks. I was still in my professional baseball mentality at the time, right? Where it was always adrenaline, and needed more things to keep you upregulated. And so I was so consumed with energy drinks and things that would keep me alert. And so doing that as the sun was going down, and then doing that so late into the day, you can only imagine how hard it was for me to go to sleep around 11 or midnight, specifically because I would get done at 10. And as we all know, the shifting out of work, the shifting of that character is rather difficult. So it's not like I was wanting to even go to sleep at 11 p.m. because I wanted to still have my unwind time and my relaxation time. And so a lot of those sleeps really didn't go until about 1, 2 in the morning. Clearly, I would have slept till about 10:30. And I had a 4-hour window till I had to go back to work, and I wasn't really paying attention to the sun. So I can't imagine, I don't remember those days. Those were close to a decade ago, but I got to think that I wasn't really connecting with nature or the sun. And I would have to imagine that largely is what impacted my mood and influenced a lot of that seasonal depression. Since then, I've thought deeply about my jobs and my careers and how I work and how to produce the best quality of work and when I want to do it and what the timing and the dosage of it is. And I've come to firmly believe and have faith in nature as the product of my creativity. And so I've set myself in alignment with those hours. I eventually branched off and I ran my own thing, and I was training on my own, taking clients on my own. And as I took clients on my own, I scheduled within the times of year that nature was allowing that for. So in the summers, I would work early, 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. And I would hit it hard with those clients in the summer as we trained. And then I remember in the winter, I tried to keep my window of work from about 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And that was when I worked then. Now, when you think of it as, did I only work for 4 hours? I don't know anyone who's trying to do anything. I don't know anybody who works for 4 hours. I mean, we are meant to work. That's what we do. I don't even know what work-life balance is. To me, what's important is that you have quality work in windows in which you're highly functioning. You put your most intentional work in those windows. And I believe it's called our ultradian. I just had a root canal, so I'm having trouble saying that. Ultradian rhythm. I know it's with a U. It's not circadian, but it's with a U. And there's a rhythm inside of us in terms of our attention span and our focus rhythms that are largely about 90-minute cycles, meaning that we can have 2 90-minute cycles a day in which we're hyper aware. We have incredible focus and determination to get things done. And if you can map that out to be able to be with where the sun is at, and you can coordinate your day to dominate within 2 90-minute windows, essentially 3 hours, you can create a lot of work. and you can get a lot done. And I think that the job of your attention span and your awareness should be able to put your work into those 2 90-minute buckets of what is your most intense work? What's the most valuable thing? What's your tier 1 of stress that you need to do daily to adapt yourself and become better at your craft and master your craft? And can you align yourself with those 2 90-minute buckets and then have a kind of a fall off phase? Can you fall off of those 2 90-minute buckets and now you have tier 2, right? So if I was working from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., I'm kind of hovering at that 4. Obviously, I'd have a break in between there. So I definitely am clearly giving myself the 2 90-minute windows. I'm putting it into that area. And before 10 a.m., what am I doing? Well, that's creativity time. That's the time to think. That's the time to journal. That's the time for me to personally work out. That's time for me to do cold exposure, meditation, breath work, movement, getting sun exposure. Post the 2 p.m., I usually always take a nap. So I walk, I take a nap. This is when I was running that schedule in the winters. And I would get back up from the nap and I would do mindless stuff, whether that was to rip out an hour worth of emails, an hour worth of text messages of responding to people, maybe a low stress phone call, low thinking phone call, just things I needed to check out the box before dinner. And then you can have dinner and then you have processing time post dinner before you go to sleep, and you sort of move throughout your day doing that. But the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. window is when you're highly hyper focused working, trying to get as much done as you possibly can. And I found a lot of success with that. So I hope that helps you guys in terms of how you're thinking about things. But a lot of this conversation and thought is coming from the fact that it's the first day of winter. I'm just thinking off the top of my head about the importance of the sun and how we get in tune with the importance of the sun and how we connect with it, so that we can be as healthy as possible. We can think as healthy as possible. We can be as connected to our emotions and our mind as best as possible. We can physically produce work that makes us stronger and flexible and more mobile, and also in a position where we can adapt from being in that position of accurate stress. You know, a lot of times when we overstress, that's how we get hurt, mentally or physically. And then also, ultimately, when we're aligned with nature, when we're in accordance with nature and the natural world, we're as connected to our soul as we can be. And Ralph Waldo Emerson was beautiful. He had a line where he talked about the nature is the body of God, I believe. And if you look at some of his stuff and a lot of his work and his practices, it was so in tune with the natural world. And even when we get into things like hiking or getting out in the woods or mountains and those sort of things, we feel something, right? We might necessarily not know how to talk about it, but we feel something. And that something that we feel is a connection with higher powers, greater potentials, cosmic energy. And when we're inside of that, we connect deeper with our soul. And as we connect deeper with our soul, we attach closer to God, and we understand our alignment with the universe and more so of who we are becoming. And there's a lot to play in that. So if I can wrap all that up with my final thoughts of the importance of sun and nature and where we are at this time of the year in the calendar, is keep in mind the ego. The ego is needed, and it's used to create our desires. It's what puts our goals out in front of us, which allows us to get to our outcomes. It's things that allows us to teach us to strategically put the correct inputs into our work so that we get the most return out of investment, which is why I just talked about with those 2 90-minute windows of hyper focus. We have 2 90-minute windows in which we can execute a lot of intense work, and we can sustain that level of thinking. So we can compact that into the alignment with where the world and the sun is at and the calendar time of the year. Now, all of a sudden, we can produce high quality work consistently, and we can become a byproduct of our alignment with nature. And then when we're connected with nature, we go beyond our ego. We go beyond the things in which our mind critically thinks and rationalizes and puts us in positions to create progress. We're closer to the soul, which ultimately is the expansion of who we are. And we need that connection to our soul so that we can keep expanding. We're using the ego daily to map out our rational, materialistic checkpoints. We're using the soul to know that we're so much bigger than those checkpoints, so much bigger than those momentarily materialistic moments and goals and jobs and identities that we carry with us. And we also use that soul to gather information from the source. And as we get that information from the source, a lot of ways in which we can grab a hold of that information is when we're connected with nature and the natural world. It's really putting yourself in a position of becoming understimulated so that you can actually create a bigger container and develop more space. The more space we have, the bigger container that we have, we can handle the stimulus of society, and we're able to respond to the stimulus in a way that is very productive. And when we're productive, we see progress. Progress is how we create our momentum, and our momentum is how we sustain our pursuits materially. And I think those are the classrooms largely to who we ultimately are and who we ultimately are becoming. And that's where it makes material success, material achievements so beneficial for us, because it exposes us more to ourselves. Ram Dass talked about that, the ego, the soul, and God, and our connection to those three. We'll call it the Trinity for the moment of this podcast. And a good friend of mine had recently sent me a write-up of Ram Dass exploring that deeper. So if you want to explore that deeper, look into his work. Obviously, Ralph Waldo Emerson, look into his work. I haven't read his stuff in a while. I think he has a book that's titled just Nature. And I think it's called that. It's been a minute since I've read his work. I got into his work some years ago. I absolutely loved it. And matter of fact, I got into his work when I was living in Minnesota. So there's a lot of parallels there. Okay, I'm changing things up a little bit today. Let's take a little bit of a pause. Just take a deep breath. Let me get a sip of tea here. I'm changing it up briefly today. I'm not going to go with the questions of the next show. I think that takes away from the question of the show. You know, I reflected and rewatched some of the work and kind of quarterbacked my own stuff. If you guys find anything that you want different from that, if you feel like I should repeat that or go back to it, just please let me know, and we can review some feedback on those things. I just think it takes away from the actual question, right? And so I want to focus on just a question for the show. And I think as we move forward, we can kind of see how that plays out. But again, I'm in the early stages of renewing myself into this conversation and understanding where this is headed. And I'm just along for the ride with all of you guys as well. So I'm also just learning on the fly, right? And I'm trying to bring about some quality content and things that allow you to think right along with me. So today we're just going to focus on one question. And this question, it's directly pointed at me, but I'm going to ask you guys first. Clearly, we don't have a side-by-side convo, so we can kind of work through this as I kind of take it onto my own. And these were both directed at me, which I'm going to try to connect the two of them and see how that plays. But the question to me directly was, what is personally challenging me in the moment? So if you think about for you, if you just pause with me for a second, let me ask you, what is personally challenging you in the moment? So right now, currently in your life, what do you feel is challenging you? And just consider that as I pause and give us time to reflect. And eventually, if you want to take it further, you pull a journal out and write about it afterwards. Audio record it if you're in your car or you're walking and you want to get out there and do that on your own. But what is personally challenging me in the moment? And the second question that kind of came about, two different people, but I'm pairing the questions, is what is my relationship with faith? So I selfishly paired those two together. More so, I think that they can be asked regularly. And I think that they coincide with each other. So if I think about what is personally challenging me in the moment currently, well, I think what's personally challenging me in the moment is obviously it's always changing. It always needs to be changing. I think what is been a regular challenge for me as I've evolved is the need of justification, right? Because I think ultimately what we're doing is, and this is where I use this relationship with faith. Ultimately, what I think we're doing is we're trying to become more of ourselves by pursuing things that challenge us. And we learn often, we gain a lot of wisdom in our pursuits of what's challenging us, of what we can and cannot take on. Meaning sometimes we get so motivated to tackle such high challenges that the failure is not, it doesn't wrap itself in wisdom for us. No, it might give us more knowledge. I don't think that we ever lose knowledge in any task that we try to take on. But I think sometimes failure can be so large, it's not necessarily just a defeating thing that beats us down. It was a naive, fully egotistical pursuit to tackle such a high challenge that you didn't get what you wanted out of the experience. You didn't extract the wisdom that you needed from it. And I think all of us would agree that the point of challenge in our lives is to, and this is the value of losing or failing, and to fail often, because the point of challenge in general in our lives is to just get us deeper into the soul and to give us more skills and more knowledge so that we're able to articulate our ego and direct our path more accurately, really, to accurately design our lives to create material progress in which ways we receive success and achievement. But when we're all ego, when it's too driven by the mind and the ego, it typically doesn't work out and for us long term. It's not the right lesson because it was extrinsic. It was too much outside of ourselves. It was either ultimately to entirely prove somebody wrong, entirely prove somebody right, entirely make somebody proud of us. And none of that is diminished as inappropriate. That wouldn't be what I would say. But if you can't balance intrinsic with extrinsic, then you're not going to get the entire fulfillment and the entire result in which you want, because you want the next checkpoint materially through your mind and your ego so that you can have more knowledge, more skills. And I think that finding the personal challenges that you're currently experiencing or you're currently having in front of you, the most important thing is to find the most important problem. And when you find the problem worth solving, there is going to be knowledge and skill that comes out of solving that problem egotistically. I just consider that material. So you acquire more skills. I think that's largely why an apprenticeship or an internship of some sort, going to colleges or schools of some sort, getting some sort of education, getting mentored, is clearly intelligent challenges that you need. But the wholeness that we need to acquire needs to go deeper than external. It needs to go deeper within. It needs to become an internal wisdom that only you can really justify and understand. And I think sometimes my personal moment of challenging currently that I experience is sometimes I feel as if I need to explain my internal progress. And I need to explain that to people, or I need to justify that to people. And it always bothers me. It's always a loss to me because I'm trying to explain the wisdom that I've acquired and I'm trying to justify that externally. And the reason why I think that becomes an issue is because that intertwines with my external ego, and I lose the internal fulfillment, the internal confidence, the connection with my soul whenever I try to express that. And anything about me, I've always chased and tackled challenge because it fuels me. And whenever I get to the next checkpoint, I feel so accomplished. It's the whole reason why I enjoy writing books. It's not necessarily, yes, it's the completion of a book, but the path of writing a book and what it does to my thinking and what it does to my discipline, and I have to be obedient to a routine. It just has always made me a better person. So I like that so aggressively, and I will place the challenge in front of me to get there. But I think if I think about it deeper and connecting with more of the human spirit of us all, what's challenging me in the moment is that justification of inner self. and things that I don't need to share with people or to tell people to get them to agree with me. It's more of I've acquired wisdom through knowledge and experiences, materially and tangibly. And as I have these new understandings of myself, they're understandings of myself for myself. And I can just be aware of that and accept that and be that. And sometimes I feel like I have to explain that to other people, and it never is a successful moment for myself. To wrap this up and to tie a bow on the entire thought experiment and the conversation with you guys is that I think that has the deep relationship with faith, because ultimately when I feel as if I need to share or justify things that I know internally or that I feel internally or I feel intuitively, that's a disconnect with faith. And that's where we can communicate internally. As I said, if I go back to Ram Dass, the ego is an extrinsic piece, is the way I understand our egos. And there's nothing wrong with that. We need to move throughout material life with that, and we need to make decisions and put things out in front of us to problem solve with that. And that becomes euphoric and extremely driven through things like dopamine, as I talked about earlier. It keeps us progressing. It makes us stronger. But then there's that middle ground on our connection to God, our connection to our faith, and that's our soul. And to our soul, the feeling of trying to explain our soul to people or to tell people our intuition and get their acceptance of that, I feel like we hand over our internal understanding of self to the extrinsic world easily, and that ends up, I don't want to say it destroys our connection to God, because it doesn't, I don't think, and it doesn't destroy our faith, because that's always there. I think it just blinds our soul to God. And I think it blinds our life force and our spiritual energy. And that's where I think over time, if that becomes unconscious, we become ignorant and we're oblivious to ourselves. We're not able to observe ourselves. We can't understand the limitation that we have in our own perspective. And so much of life's greatest joys and gifts are being able to see limitation in our personal perspective and being able to constantly sort of maintain the essence of the child, maintain the childlike tendencies to explore and discover with our time on the planet. So finishing things out, make sure you guys get out there and view the sun, see the sunset, see the sunrise. Obviously, with the disclaimer here, don't just look at the sun directly. We all know that. But there's a thing called sun gazing, where you can see the peripherals or the panoramic view of a sunrise or a sunset, and you can kind of get this horizon type view, and you guys will notice a very calming effect when that happens. Because, here's the last tidbit, because those eyes are outside of the skull, that means that the brain is being impacted by that panoramic, that horizontal-ish view, we'll call it. And the peripheral need of the eyes, the receptors of that, what that does is it goes all the way back to the lobes of the back of the brain, and those lobes run down to the nervous system, and they turn on your parasympathetic state, your parasympathetic nervous system. And when our nervous system is in parasympathetic, we're in rest, digest, we're in adaptability, we're adapting. And that's why you feel, signing off after this, that's why you feel so energized and creative with friends and family and loving and caring. And you feel like you have those best ideas, those life-changing ideas when you're watching a sunset. But it's because you are physiologically developing a bigger container. And when that container gets bigger, you have psychological space. You can think and create. And as you guys hear me say often, physiology first. So there's a lot in there. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed the show. I really enjoyed talking about the sun. And I'm really happy that I brought up Helena, Montana. Because I loved Montana. I love Montana. But that was a cool experience for me. Take care, everybody. Cheers.